The warning lights turned red across every screen on station. Captain stood in the command center of the UEF, an old frigate that was supposed to be torn apart for scrap metal in 3 days. She was 58 years old and she had served in the fleet for 35 years. In 3 days, she would retire. She would go to New, where her daughter lived with her husband and their little girl. She would sit in a garden and drink tea and watch her granddaughter grow up. That was the plan. The message on the screen changed everything. 500 warships from the hegemony were moving toward New. Their leader, Admiral, had sent a simple message to all human worlds: surrender or die. The colony had refused. Now the hegemony fleet was coming to make an example of them. Read the message 3 times. 2.3 million people lived on New. Her daughter was one of them. Her granddaughter was another. She walked through the old ship, her boots making soft sounds on the metal floor. It was 200 years old. It had been built during humanity's first war among the stars, back when humans were fighting just to survive. Now it was a museum piece, kept running only because Chief Engineer Han refused to let it die. Was in the engine room when found her. She was 62 years old, with gray hair and hands that were always covered in grease. She had spent 30 years on this ship. She knew every bolt, every wire, every strange sound it made in the night. "You heard," said. Nodded, "I heard. The fleet was scattered by an ambush 2 days ago. No one can reach New in time. Except us. Except us." They stood in silence for a moment. The engine hummed around them, old and tired but still alive. "How fast can we go?" asked. "Fast enough to get there before the hegemony arrives. Maybe 12 hours to spare." Paused. "The ship won't survive a fight, you know that. We have 47 crew members and guns that haven't been fired in 20 years. "I know. So what's the plan?" Looked at her old friend. "I haven't figured that out yet, but I'm not going to sit here and watch my granddaughter die." She gathered the crew in the main hall. 47 people stood before her. Some were old veterans like herself. Others were young officers who had been assigned to them for training, because no one thought an old ship would ever see real combat. Lieutenant was 26 years old, fresh from the academy, with bright eyes and a face that had never seen war. Weapons Officer Shin was 34, quiet and serious, with a reputation for being the best shot in the fleet. Told them everything: the hegemony fleet, the colony, the fact that no help was coming. "We are one ship," she said. "They are 500, I won't lie to you. If we go to New, most of us will probably die, maybe all of us." She paused. "But there are 2 million people on that planet, children, families, they have no one else." The room was silent. "This ship was built to protect humanity," continued. "I don't see an expiration date on that mission, but I won't force anyone to come with me. The escape pods are ready. Anyone who wants to leave can leave. No judgment, no shame. I'll write the best recommendation letter you've ever seen." No one moved. Young lieutenant stepped forward. "Captain, I joined the fleet to protect people. If I run away now, what was the point?" Nodded. "The guns might be old, but they still work. I checked them myself last month." One by one the crew members spoke. Some were scared, some were angry, but all of them chose to stay. Felt something warm in her chest, pride maybe, or hope. "Then let's get to work," she said. "We have 12 hours to figure out how to fight a war." They pulled away from station and jumped into faster-than-light travel. The stars stretched into lines of light, and then everything went dark except for the soft glow of the ship's old systems. In his massive flagship, the Eternal Verdict, Admiral received reports that a single human ship was heading toward New. He laughed when he heard it was an old frigate scheduled for destruction. Humans were strange creatures, he thought. They never knew when to give up. He had 500 of the most powerful warships in the galaxy. Each one was built to destroy entire fleets. The humans had sent one ancient ship crewed by 47 people. It was almost insulting. "Should we send ships to intercept them?" his second officer asked. No, said. Let them come. Let them watch as we burn their world. Then we will destroy them last so they die knowing they failed. He smiled. This would be easy. Far away in the darkness between stars, Captain sat alone in her quarters. She looked at a photograph on her desk. Her daughter, smiling. Her granddaughter, only 3 years old, sitting on his lap. I'm coming, whispered. Hold on, I'm coming. The old ship flew on through the endless night, carrying 47 souls toward an impossible battle. Chief Engineer Han had a secret. She had kept it for 30 years, waiting for a day she hoped would never come. Now that day was here. She called Captain and Lieutenant to the engine room. The ship was still traveling through the darkness between stars, and they had 10 hours before they reached New. There's something you need to know about this ship, said. She walked to an old control panel covered in dust and rust. There wasn't just a regular frigate. It was built as part of something called the Protocol. Lieutenant looked confused. I've never heard of that. You weren't supposed to. Nobody was. Wiped the dust away from the panel. Underneath, there were buttons and switches that looked different from everything else on the ship. Newer, hidden. 200 years ago, during our first war, humanity was losing. We were desperate. So our engineers built weapons that were meant to be used only once, only if we had no other choice. Weapons so dangerous that they were buried in the ship's code and never spoken of again. Captain stepped closer. What kind of weapons? 3 systems. Began pressing buttons. Old screens flickered to life, showing diagrams and numbers that hadn't been seen in centuries. The first is called the Phantom Array. It messes with enemy sensors. It can make us look like 100 ships or make us invisible. The second is the Ancestor's Wrath. It uses magnetic fields to throw objects at incredible speeds. Any piece of metal, any rock, any debris becomes a bullet that moves faster than anything the enemy has ever seen. And the third. Paused, her face grew serious. The third is called the Last Word. It turns the ship's reactor into a bomb, a directed explosion that releases all the energy at once, in a single beam. It would destroy everything in its path for thousands of kilometers. That would kill us, said quietly. Yes, it's a final option, a last word as the name says. You only use it when there's nothing left to lose. Captain looked at the old screens, at the secrets that had been sleeping inside her ship for 200 years. Can you bring these systems online? I can try. The code is old. Some of the hardware might not work anymore, but I'll need help. She looked at Lieutenant. You're good with computers, yes? Nodded. I was top of my class in systems engineering. Good, then get to work. We have 10 hours. For the next 10 hours and worked without rest. They dug through ancient code, repaired broken circuits, and brought dead systems back to life. The rest of the crew prepared for battle. They checked weapons, sealed damaged sections of the hull, and said quiet prayers to whatever gods they believed in. Weapons Officer Shin spent her time at the targeting console. The ship's guns were old, but she knew them like she knew her own hands. She ran test after test, making small adjustments, improving accuracy by tiny amounts. Every little bit would matter. Captain walked through the ship, talking to her crew. She learned their names, their stories, their fears. Young Ensign was only 22 years old. She had joined the fleet because she wanted to see the stars. Now she might die among them. Are you scared? Asked her. Thought about it? Yes, but I think I'm more scared of not doing anything, of just watching people die because I was too afraid to help. Smiled sadly. That's the right kind of scared. 8 hours into their journey, they received a transmission from New. The colony's leader, Governor Park, had refused Admiral's demand to surrender. His message, broadcast to all frequencies, was short and clear. We are not yours to erase. The hegemony fleet arrived at New 2 hours later. 500 ships formed a massive wall of metal and fire around the planet. Admiral sent another message, giving the colony 24 hours to change their minds. On the planet below, people gathered in the streets. Some cried. Some held their families close. Some looked up at the sky and waited. Captain's daughter sat with her little girl in their small home. She had heard nothing from her mother. She didn't know if help was coming. All she could do was hold her child and wait. They dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the star system. Through the windows, the crew could see the distant lights of the hegemony fleet, like a swarm of angry fireflies surrounding their home. 500 warships, each one bigger than each one armed with weapons that could crack a planet in half. And here they were, one old ship, 47 people. Captain took her seat on the bridge. Her crew looked at her, waiting. Some of them were trembling, all of them were brave. She opened a communication channel. Every ship in the hegemony fleet would hear her words. "This is Captain of the UEF. I am here to accept your surrender." Across the fleet, on 500 different ships, alien officers stared at their screens in disbelief. On the flagship, Admiral heard the message and laughed so hard that tears ran down his face. "One ship," he said between laughs. "One old ship asks for our surrender. These humans are insane." He didn't know it yet, but he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Admiral gave the order to destroy the human ship. 50 warships turned their guns toward thee and fired. The missiles flew through space, bright lines of death moving faster than any eye could follow. On this bridge, Lieutenant watched them come on his screen. 50 missiles, each one powerful enough to turn their ship into dust. "Now," Captain said calmly. In the engine room, Chief Engineer hand-pressed a button that hadn't been touched in 200 years. The Phantom Array came to life. On every hegemony ship, the sensors went crazy. The single human frigate disappeared from their screens. In its place, they saw 2 ships, then 10, then 50, then 200. Ghost images spread across the darkness of space, each one looking exactly like the real thing. The missiles lost their target. They scattered, chasing phantoms, exploding harmlessly in the empty void. Admiral stopped laughing. "What is this?" he demanded. "Find the real ship." But the hegemony sensors couldn't tell which contact was real. The Phantom Array was old technology, but it was built in a time when humans had to survive by being clever. It was designed to fool sensors far more advanced than anything the hegemony had. Captain smiled grimly. "Take us in, Lieutenant, right through the middle of their fleet." They moved forward, invisible among its army of ghosts. 500 warships fired at shadows while the real ship slipped between them like smoke through fingers. Weapons Officer Shin watched her console with cold focus. She didn't have enough firepower to destroy the enemy ships directly. Their shields were too strong, their armor too thick, so she did something smarter. She started cutting. Her first shot hit a communication relay on a destroyer. The ship went silent, unable to receive orders. Her second shot took out the sensor array on a cruiser, leaving it blind. Her third shot hit the cooling system of a battleship's main gun, causing it to overheat and shut down. Shot after shot didn't try to kill, she crippled. She wounded. She turned the hegemony's own size against them. "Enemy ships are colliding," reported. "They can't coordinate, they're shooting at each other." It was true. Without clear communication, without reliable sensors, the massive fleet was becoming its own worst enemy. Ships that had never learned to think for themselves waited for orders that never came. Guns fired at allies instead of enemies. But they couldn't stay invisible forever. The Phantom Array was burning through power at an alarming rate. His voice came over the intercom. "We have maybe 2 hours before the array fails. After that, they'll see exactly where we are." "Understood," said. "Then we need to end this before that happens." She studied the enemy formation on her screen. 500 ships, but they all orbited around one point. The flagship, the eternal verdict, Admiral's command center. Every order in this fleet came from that one ship. Every decision flowed from one mind. She said, "What happens if we take out the flagship?" The young lieutenant ran calculations on his console. The hegemony military is built on strict hierarchy. Ships don't act without orders from above. If we destroy, the rest of the fleet will fall into chaos. They won't know what to do. Then that's our target. The changed course, pushing through the confused enemy formation toward the heart of the fleet. Along the way, continued her work. A weapons system here. An engine there. She fought like a doctor who knew exactly where to cut to cause the most damage with the least effort. But luck couldn't last forever. A hegemony gunner firing blindly at a ghost contact got lucky. His shot clipped this rear section. The ship shook violently. Alarms screamed. In the engine room, a pipe burst and sprayed superheated steam across the floor. "Report," shouted. "We lost the secondary power relay," called back. "The phantom array is fluctuating. I can keep it running, but we're visible now. For a few seconds at a time, they can see us." Those few seconds were enough. The hegemony ships finally had a real target. They began to converge, hundreds of guns turning toward the small frigate that had humiliated them. "Evasive action," ordered. The old ship twisted and turned, dodging fire that would have destroyed it instantly. Pushed the engines beyond their limits. The hull groaned in protest, but they kept moving, kept fighting, kept surviving. On the planet below, Governor Park watched the battle through orbital telescopes. He saw the tiny human ship dancing among giants, refusing to die. Tears ran down his face. "Who are they?" someone asked. "I don't know," said, "but I've never seen anything so beautiful." They broke through the outer ring of the fleet. Ahead of them, surrounded by its guard ships, the eternal verdict waited. Admiral's flagship, the head of the snake. Captain looked at her crew. They were tired, they were scared, they were still fighting. "All power to forward shields," she said. "Take us straight at them." Captain said quietly, "We won't survive a direct attack." "I know," smiled sadly, "but they don't know what we're willing to sacrifice, and that's going to cost them everything." The old frigate accelerated toward the flagship, trailing fire and smoke, broken but unbowed. The final battle was about to begin. They flew straight toward Admiral's flagship. Around it, enemy ships fired without mercy. The old frigate shook with every hit. Metal screamed. Lights flickered and died. On the bridge, Ensign worked at her communication console. Blood ran down her face from a cut on her forehead, but her hands never stopped moving. "Captain," she said, "I can send a data package to Nu, everything about the protocol, the weapons, the codes. If we don't survive, at least the knowledge won't die with us." Nodded. "Do it." Began the transmission. Files streamed from the dying ship to the planet below, carrying secrets that were 200 years old. Future human ships would have these weapons. Future humans would be able to fight back. A plasma blast tore through the hull and struck console. The young ensign was thrown backward. When Lieutenant reached her, she was already gone. Her eyes were still open, still looking at the screen where her transmission had completed successfully. She was 22 years old. Closed her eyes gently. "Rest now, you did your part." There was no time to mourn. More hits rocked the ship. In the engine room, a coolant line ruptured, spraying deadly radiation into the air. Chief Engineer hand-sealed the door behind her, trapping herself inside. Her voice came over the intercom, calm and steady. "The reactor is failing. I can keep it running a little longer, but I need to stay here and control it manually." Captain's voice cracked. "The radiation in there will kill you." "I know. I've got maybe 15 minutes before it becomes too much. That should give you enough time to reach the flagship." There was a pause. "It's been an honor serving with you. All these years, this old ship was my home. Let me give her a proper ending." He couldn't find the words. "Don't waste time on goodbyes. You have a job to do. Go." The captain wiped her eyes and turned back to the battle. Through the smoke and fire, the eternal verdict was getting closer. His flagship was massive, 10 times the size of the, covered with guns and shields that should have been impossible to break. Shin never stopped firing. Her shots hit sensor after sensor, gun after gun. The flagship's defenses began to weaken under her precise attacks. "I see an opening," she reported. "The bridge section has thinner armor on the lower left side. If we can get close enough, I can put everything we have into that spot." "Then that's what we do," said. "Take us in." The young lieutenant pushed the engines to their breaking point. The ship lurched forward, moving faster than it had ever moved before. Enemy fire pounded them from every direction. Hull breaches opened across the ship. Atmosphere leaked into space. 47 crew members had started this fight. Now there were 31. They crashed through the defensive screen of small ships protecting the flagship. Metal scraped against metal. The frigate's hull was torn open in 3 places, but they were through. They were close enough. Fire shouted. Pressed every button at once. Every missile, every gun, every weapon the old ship had left flew toward the Eternal Verdict's bridge. The shots punched through the weakened armor and exploded inside. On his throne, Admiral Barely had time to understand what was happening. One moment he was watching the battle with annoyance. The next moment, fire was everywhere. His last word, captured by recording systems that would later be recovered, was a single cry of disbelief in his native language. Then he was gone, along with his entire command staff. The flagship went dark. Across the hegemony fleet, chaos erupted. Ships waited for orders that would never come. Captains who had never made a decision in their lives suddenly had no one to tell them what to do. Some ships collided with each other. Some fired at allies by mistake. Many simply stopped moving, frozen by uncertainty. But there was dying. His voice came one last time, weak and fatting. "Reactor critical. You have 5 minutes before it blows." "Abandon ship," ordered. "All hands to escape pods now." The surviving crew members ran toward the pods. 28 people pushed into small metal capsules and launched into space. They flew away from the burning ship, away from the chaos, toward the safety of distance. But 3 people stayed on the bridge. Lieutenant refused to leave. "Someone has to steer the ship away from the planet, Captain. When the reactor explodes, all that energy has to go somewhere safe." Captain sat back down in her chair. "Then I'll stay with you." Shin limped to the helm. Her leg was wounded, bleeding through a hasty bandage. "Neither of you knows how to fly this thing properly. I'll do it." Looked at them both. These brave people who had chosen to die so that others might live. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." Nodded silently, managed a small smile. They turned away from Nu, pointing its shattered nose toward the empty darkness of space. In the engine room, his body lay still, but the reactor she had protected continued to build toward explosion. Far away in their escape pods, the surviving crew watched their ship fly into the night. Captain sent one final message to Nu. It was short, just a few words. "I love you, take care of your daughter, live well." Then she turned off the communicator and faced forward. The stars were beautiful. "It's time," she said quietly. They carried its 3 passengers toward eternity. The 12 surviving crew members floated in their escape pods and watched the fly away from Nu. The old ship was barely holding together, trailing fire and debris as it moved into the darkness between the planet and the confused enemy fleet. On the bridge, Captain held the armrests of her chair. Beside her, Lieutenant monitored the failing systems. At the helm, Shin kept the ship on course with steady hands despite her wounds. "Reactor at critical," reported. His voice was calm. There was no point in panic now. Nodded, she thought about her daughter, safe on the planet below. She thought about her granddaughter, who would grow up in a world where humanity was no longer prey. It was a good thought to die with. "Programmed the last word protocol before she died," said quietly. "When the reactor goes, the explosion will be focused into a beam instead of spreading everywhere. I've aimed us at the thickest part of their fleet." One last shot said, "One last word." "Yes, Captain." Looked at his commanding officer. "No regrets." Smiled, "None, you." "I always wondered what I would do when the moment came, when I had to choose between my life and something bigger." He took a deep breath. Turns out it wasn't a hard choice at all. The reactor's warning sounds grew louder. The ship began to shake. "It's happening," said. Captain straightened in her chair. She thought of her crew, of the 31 who had died so they could reach this moment. Of Ensign, who had sent the protocol to Nu with her last breath. Of Chief Engineer Han, who had given her life to keep the reactor running just a few minutes longer. They had all paid the price. Now it was time to collect. "For humanity," said. "For humanity," and echoed. The exploded. But it wasn't just an explosion. The last word protocol activated exactly as had programmed it. 200 years of forbidden technology focused all the energy of the dying reactor into a single direction. A beam of pure destruction shot forward, white and terrible and beautiful. It cut through the hegemony fleet like a blade through paper. 127 ships were destroyed in less than a second. They simply ceased to exist, turned to atoms by a weapon that should never have been built, fired by a ship that should never have fought, crewed by humans who refused to accept that some battles cannot be won. The remaining hegemony ships panicked. Without admiral, without clear commands, with over a quarter of their fleet suddenly gone, their captains made the only decision they could. They ran. Faster-than-light drives activated across the fleet as ships fled in every direction, desperate to escape whatever monster they had awakened. On Nu, 2.3 million people looked up at the sky. They saw a second sun bloom in the darkness, a flash of light brighter than anything they had ever seen. Then it faded, and the enemy ships that had surrounded their world began to disappear, jumping away into the safety of deep space. Governor Park stood in his office, tears streaming down his face. He understood what had happened. Someone had paid the ultimate price to save them all. In her small home, held her daughter and watched the light fade from the sky. She had received her mother's last message. She knew what it meant. "Grandma," her little girl asked, "what was that light?" Couldn't answer. She just held her child and cried. The escape pods were recovered 2 hours later. The 12 survivors were brought to Nu as heroes. They told the story of Captain and her impossible mission, of 47 people who had stood against 500 warships and won. The news spread across human space like wildfire. Within days, everyone knew the story. Within weeks, monuments were being built. Within months, the scattered human colonies began talking about unity for the first time in 100 years. If one old ship could defeat an empire, what could a united humanity accomplish? 5 years later, the human colonies formed the Terran Compact, a single government dedicated to mutual protection. They built new ships based on the protocol, weapons designed for desperate times that would never allow such times to come again. 10 years later, humanity was recognized as a major power in the galaxy. The hegemony, weakened by their defeat at Nu, never fully recovered. They learned to fear the small, stubborn species they had once dismissed as vermin. 20 years later, his daughter, now a young woman, stood at the memorial built for the crew of A full-size replica of the ship floated above station, with 47 names carved into its hull. Her grandmother's name was at the top. She read the words carved beneath the names, the same words that were now written on every human warship across the galaxy. They thought they would erase us. They learned that humanity does not erase. We endure, we remember, and when we must, we burn so brightly that the galaxy itself takes notice. She touched the cold metal of the memorial and smiled. "Thank you, grandmother," she whispered. "We're living well just like you asked." Above her, the stars shone in the endless night. Somewhere among them, the atoms of the and its three final crew members drifted through space, forever part of the universe they had saved. Captain had asked for the enemy's surrender. In the end, she got something better. She got humanity's future. And that future, bright and unafraid, spread across the galaxy like sunrise over new.